It's been a very busy week in the world of spaceflight, so in this week's podcast, we're going to do our very best to get you up to date.
We also pay our respects to former NASA astronaut Dr. William Edgar Thornton, who passed away on January 12th.
And don't forget that we have social media too. You can follow us at Space and Things 1 on Twitter or get involved at Space and Things Podcast on Facebook and Instagram.
Thanks once again for tuning in and supporting our podcast, but right now, we hope you enjoy episode 21 of the Space and Things podcast.
You're listening to the Space and Things podcast with Emily Carney and Dave Giles.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 21 of our podcast. Now, Emily, we had a fantastic response to last week's show. Who knew that it would be alternative histories that was the silver bullet for us? Who knew?
Yeah, I was really, exactly. I was very encouraged to see all the positive responses to that episode. I think it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm really excited, and thanks to everybody who reached out on that one.
Yeah, thanks a lot to all those. We're going to go through some of those responses later. But also, Emily, it's almost like someone at Apple TV may be a fan of the podcast. After all, the very next day after we talked about For All Mankind with such glowing praise, they released the long trailer, the second trailer for the second series of For All Mankind. Is this a coincidence? I think not.
Yeah, that trailer dropped right after our episode came out.
Yeah.
It was really cool. I was so excited to see it. I was like, I'm ready. Let's just bring out the show now. Or just bring it out early because we're all like sitting here depressed and stuff. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Just bring it out.
Although it's still going to be a great birthday present for you when that is out.
Yes. Oh yeah. I'm gonna have an awesome day. I think I'm going to take that day off from work because I'm like,
Nice.
Hey,
yeah,
why not? I'm just going to sit and watch For All Mankind and just chill, you know?
Absolutely. And looking at that trailer, it does look like you were correct. It's going to be a lot more Cold War-y. Can I use that like that? I'm going to.
I don't know. There's really no other way to put it. I mean, it looks like we're fighting the Soviets up on the moon or something. I don't know. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah, we certainly will see. But you've had a busy week, Emily. I've noticed you've had 2 new blog posts up, one on each of your blogs. So let's start with your latest blog, The Making of an Ex-Nuke. You've written a fantastic article on there this week. So tell us a bit more about it.
Thank you. My last blog was basically about, it was kind of a simple title, basically how we can better support women in space flight and tech writing, pretty much. I've had a lot of these ideas in my head for like months. Like, man, I wish I could, write down and suggest, ways to support us, because I've had kind of internal frustrations over the past few years and I never really voiced them. And I was like, why don't you just write it down? Okay, someone might get mad. They'll get over it. Nobody ever died from being mad before, It boiled down to, the best way I think we can amplify, women, and not just women, I mean, minority voices, anybody who kind of started at maybe a different point than some, a male writer. Mm-hmm. I think the best way we can amplify those voices is just by sharing their work and treating their work as kind of, on the same level as a guy's work,
Absolutely.
That was basically it. It was very, very simple idea. I did bring in a few, statistics in the piece. Like I brought in some other articles that I'd read, and one of them was a CNBC article, and it was basically, discussing how women at, the same point in their careers as men tend to not get, higher level positions. So we're really kind of historically, I hate saying this, it sounds so awful, but we've always kind of been behind. And another thing I brought up was that, a lot of women's writing, it's kind of viewed as like a novelty almost. She's talented, but she's real cute, that kind of stuff. And
yeah.
It's viewed as like,
good for you, pat on the back.
Yeah, it's not viewed through the same lens as like a man's work, a man's writing or something like that, and I brought up an example of there's some dude some dude critic was talking about a woman's novel, and instead of really discussing her work, he was like discussing her pouty lips or just something dumb. And I'm like, just stuff like that. And it's like, and I hate to go off on men. I really do. I don't want to sound like, hateful or something, but it's like, all we want to do is get seen, have our work shared as like being on the same level as a guy's work. That's it. It's very simple.
I'll be honest, Emily, I didn't take it as being hateful at all. I thought you were being quite constructive in your criticism. And it'd be interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks with the new NASA administrator, because there's a lot of talk that the Biden administration are going to choose a first female leader of NASA. There's talk of it either being Ellen Stofan, who's already made history by being the first director of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, or Pam Melroy, former astronaut Pam Melroy. And I don't know if either of them are actually going to get it. They're both highly qualified, more than qualified to do that job. But it'll be interesting to see whether having a woman at the top of NASA changes any of this sexism that exists within certain aspects of the fandom of space, or whether this causes an even bigger explosion of stuff that we have to deal with. I hope not the second one.
Yeah. No, I agree. I've kind of wondered about the same thing. I'm like, I think that will be awesome, and if that does happen, I'll be thrilled because obviously, I mean, in my lifetime, I've never seen it. I'm 43, and I'm like, we've never seen that. That would be awesome.
Yeah,
I hope it's the former and not the latter. That's all. I'm sure we're gonna see some of the latter. I'm sure there'll be a few people who just have to say what they want to say, and that's fine. We can ignore them.
Yes, we can. And hopefully this event happening, if it does happen, will just show them that, women do belong in this industry.
I mean, I don't know if it's going to be either of those two women. I've heard a few rumors of who they might select, and all the women's names that I've heard dropped are perfect candidates. Absolutely.
And there's no reason to suggest that any of those names would do anything but a phenomenal job. So we'll look forward to the developments on that. But great article, Emily. I will put the link in the show notes, but we have also shared it on social media, which takes me to your other blog. Now, your National Space Society blog, This Space Available. Unfortunately, at the top of the show, you heard us say that we had a tribute to pay this week to a former astronaut, but we have another tribute we have to pay as well, and that's what the subject of this blog was about. So I'll pass over to you to talk about that.
Yeah, last week it came out that space historian Phil Clark passed away. He actually passed away in late 2020, but the news really just filtered over to our side of the coast here last week, so we didn't know about it. Phil Clark is a huge hero of mine. He's one of the big Soviet spaceflight experts of the 1980s and all time, basically. He was also an expert on the Chinese space program, and his career started. He was a member of the British Interplanetary Society, which was started by Arthur C. Clarke, no relation, I think back in the 30s or 40s, quite some time ago. And he was a pretty big figure in that group. And during the 1980s, he started talking to other members, including Rex Hall. That's another very famous person who was in that society. At that time, they just started sort of finding out what the Soviets were doing in space, because there was a lot of secrecy, between the East and the West at the time. So Clark started to compile these things together in a book that was eventually published in 1988. And the book is called The Soviet Manned Space Program. The reason why it's called that was because at the time, that was the language in spaceflight. I know if Phil released it more recently, it would be called the Soviet Space Program. So just a note on that. But it is one of the best books ever written about Soviet spaceflight. Although it is an older book, I still recommend it. It's a great resource to have. And it's beautifully illustrated, and it's just a great book. So it's a masterpiece. Over the years, he did edit a a volume of the Jane Spaceflight Directory. Some of y'all may be familiar with that. It was a huge book that was published for a number of years. I have a couple of them at my house. They're older, but they're still a fine resource to have. And he wrote a number of articles about Soviet and Chinese spaceflight over the years. He was a friend of mine. I'm really devastated he's gone. He and I used to talk and go back and forth, and he was just a lot of fun to talk to. He was kind of an eccentric, kind of in the old school British sense, I guess. I'll miss him terribly. I really will. I'm honestly in shock he's gone. It hasn't really hit me because I always thought, I can just write him and ask him a question about something. Yeah. And so it's just very sad. There's been too many losses over the last year. So
for sure, far too many losses. I believe that main book he wrote is out of print now, but
yes,
you can still pick up a copy fairly easily and for quite a decent price, I believe.
Yeah, you can still get, it is out of print, but you can still find copies of it. If you look on used book websites, or if you look on Amazon, you can find copies of it. I have 2 copies of it. I have the American version. Bless his heart, one of my cats tried to eat it.
Oh, no.
a few years ago, so it's covered with little bite marks on it. I do have the British version, which I ordered off Amazon, and I have it, I think, tucked away somewhere so my cat wouldn't eat it.
The joy of pet ownership. But it's a book that I don't own, but I do need to get a copy of that and have a read through. It's the Soviet and the Chinese space programs I just don't know enough about. But anyway, it's sad news about the loss of Philip Clark. And as always, our condolences go out to his fans and family, and to you, Emily. My condolences to you.
Thank you.
Because he was your friend.
Yeah, thank you.
But we have plenty to get on with today, and we're already 11 minutes in. So let's move on to the rest of the show.
And the spacecraft Soyuz has now been inserted into orbit. Orbital flight has been initiated.
There was at least 12 different stories which were worthy of being brought up. I tried to sneak some into our first section, but we'll do our best here. So let's start with something that we did mention last week. So last Wednesday, the 13th of January, SpaceX performed 3 static fire tests on the SN9 Starship prototype at their facility in Boca Chica in Texas. The 3 Raptor engines were fired briefly as part of a pre-flight routine for the SN9, which is being prepared for a high-altitude test flight. And we reported last week that if this had been successful, then we may have actually seen the flight take place at the weekend. However, there does appear to have been some problems. The CEO of SpaceX, Elon Musk, has tweeted that there was some damage to 2 of the engines, and in fact, they've had to replace them. The test flight has now been put back while they do that and perform the static firing tests again. For those of you who don't know, the Starship is a new rocket which is in development to be able to take people to the moon, Mars, and potentially other destinations as well. And they're hoping that this will all be completely reusable. So this is a little bit of a setback, but they normally recover fairly quickly.
The next day, Thursday, January 14th, Blue Origin, which is run by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, launched an upgraded version of their New Shepard spacecraft, which is named after the Mercury 7 astronaut, Alan Shepard, not shirtless Alan Shepard. Sorry, had to drop that in there. Similar to what SpaceX have been developing, this rocket and capsule are both reusable, with the booster landing in its landing zone near the launch pad with a powered vertical touchdown and the capsule parachuting not too far away. The spacecraft launched from the company's base in West Texas, and it was a suborbital flight, which reached a maximum height of 66 miles. That is 4 miles above the Kármán line, which is usually used to define the boundary of space, or 100 kilometers approximately.
Yep.
The visuals from this launch were fantastic. I saw some of them on Twitter. There were amazing drone shots and images from inside the capsule where they had a fake astronaut strapped in who they dubbed Mannequin Skywalker. So pretty funny. Pretty good pun there.
Oh, I love that. I don't think it got as much attention as it should have, that.
It was. I know. I read that and I chuckled. I was like, "That's a good one."
It is a good one. I also do love the fact that their suborbital rocket is called Alan Shepard because his flight was suborbital. I love that. I think I've mentioned that
New
before.
Glenn is gonna be orbital, so that makes a lot of sense. I like that.
Just amazing. Anyway, also last Thursday, the makers of the award-winning Apollo 11 film, which came out in 2019, announced that they've made a sequel. While I was upset at first that it's not Apollo 12, because I would love to have seen a Pete Conrad, Alan Bean, and Dick Gordon film, I would have loved that. They've released the trailer for a short film called Apollo 11 Quarantine, which is rather appropriate given our current set circumstances. And this film looks at the period of time after the astronauts returned to the Earth when they were kept in quarantine for 21 days. This will have a limited release in some IMAX theatre from the 29th of January and will also apparently be available online, although I've not seen the details of what streaming services that will be available on. Obviously, in the UK, cinemas aren't open, so I'm really hoping they get this online stuff sorted for people like me who really do want to see this movie.
Yeah, the closest movie theater to me now is like in Oldsmar, which is where my family lives, and it's about 45 minutes away because I'll be real, all the theaters close to where I live are closed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I'll drive to Oldsmar. It's pretty safe. You know, I haven't been to the theater there in a long time, but from what I understand, there's nobody going anyway. So it'd be cool to see it in IMAX, but if worse comes to worse, I will check it out at home on my computer or TV. Who knows?
With it being about the quarantine, I don't think it's as necessary to view it in IMAX as the original film, where that launch footage in IMAX was just stunning and all the breathtaking views from the moon, all that stuff was phenomenal. You know, this is them sitting in a mobile quarantine unit and then a building in Houston. It's not quite the same. It's not going to have the same IMAX impact, I don't think.
Yeah, like unless you want to see like a pimple on somebody's cheek in IMAX, then you're like, yeah, this is what I want. But it's like, you know, the movie was so, like you said, I mean, some of this, just seeing the Saturn V vertical, it was like you almost had to it was like a big reveal. Like you had to see it in that scale. So yeah, I totally get it. I could probably, I don't know, I'll probably watch it at home. So,
but you know, now we've both said that, we're both going to watch it at home and then be like, oh man, we need to see that at the cinema.
Yeah, next episode, we'll be like, man, I got to see it in a theater. I'll be dialing up like every theater, like, do y'all have this one? That's pretty funny. All right. Okay, on Saturday, January 16th, we saw an attempt by NASA of the green run test of the core stage of the Space Launch System, or SLS rocket. They were due to do a full static fire test of the 4 engines for 8 minutes to simulate a launch, but they shut down after just 67.2 seconds. The abort was automatically triggered by some sensors, and NASA have released a statement saying that the core stage is still in good condition, and that this abort would have not happened in flight, but it happened because the ground test parameters are a lot more conservative than in-flight equivalents. They're set like this in order to try and preserve the core stage so it can still fly if something goes wrong on the ground. While this undoubtedly means there probably will be a delay to the program, it does show that the systems were working as they should, and NASA are saying that they have some fantastic data from the burn and that they know the cause of the shutdown. This all happened 2 days after the Orion spacecraft, which will sit on top of this rocket, was taken out of its stand at the checkout building at Kennedy Space Center, ready to be fueled and installed on top of the rocket. So, a mixed bag of news for the Artemis program and NASA's plan to launch the uncrewed Artemis 1 in 2021.
Yeah, it's been a strange week for that, really, isn't it? Because obviously we've had the success of Blue Origin, and also our next story, which is coming up, is positive. But with both this story and the SN9 story, it's kind of a big reminder. This is why we test. It is to figure out these kind of problems. I mean, Rocket Lab had to call off a launch as well over in New Zealand, and also because of some sensors picking something up, and they've rescheduled that, and their mission is called Another One Leaves the Crust, which is just amazing. You know, these things happen. We did a whole episode about Scrubs as well. So I think NASA got a bit of a hard time about this, in my opinion.
I agree.
While constructive criticism is obviously valid, I think this has gone a bit too far, and predominantly, again, from the SpaceX fanboys who have done this despite the fact that they've had their own problems with SN9 and those engines that need replacing. But once again, we have to remind everyone that it's not a competition.
Exactly.
They're both doing completely different things. There's room for both. There's definitely need for SN9 and what they're doing, and SLS has a place as well. But they're doing very different testing strategies here, so it's really unfair to even compare the two in many regards.
It's a different approach to what NASA has really done in the past as well. In the 60s, Apollo had all-up testing, which basically was just super integrated testing. And that was actually really ballsy because some of the test stuff went wrong in flight, like Apollo 6. I mean, that I read about that and I'm like, holy crap, like everything went wrong, or a lot of stuff went wrong. Like if there had been people on board, they wouldn't have made it to the moon. And of course, what's the next Saturn V launch? People going to the moon. Yeah. So that's very ballsy. I don't think NASA or really anybody, not to say, oh, NASA's being too safe, but I don't think anybody would do that nowadays. It also bears mentioning in the 70s when they were testing the same type of main engines for the shuttle, you could probably, I don't know, I haven't searched for it. You could probably go to YouTube and find some. They were blowing those up all the time. I mean, there was a lot of concern that, is this thing going to work at all? And finally they got it right, but still, I mean, that was a big concern for a long time. And it's quite, when you blow something up, you can't use it again.
Yeah.
So something to think about,
And also, like, just in terms of that approach, this rocket they're intending to have one launch test with it before they put humans in it. Exactly,
yeah. Whereas Apollo, they had a bigger budget. They had, all the Apollo test program, which was really pretty extensive. But for the Saturn V, they had Apollo 4, and then they had, I think Apollo 5 was a Saturn 1. It was a test of the lunar module. And then they had 6, which went almost pretty wrong. And then the next one had people on it. So yeah, I agree. It's a different time. It's also a different program from SpaceX. We shouldn't expect them to be doing the exact same thing.
Absolutely. And even SpaceX with the Falcon 9, they took 90-odd flights before they put humans on board. Testing should be more conservative when you're putting humans on board.
Yeah, they have to get it right, basically.
They have to get it right, yeah, exactly. So, we'll see how this develops. Hopefully the delay won't be too long because they've managed to keep that core stage in good condition and they shut down early. So hopefully it won't be too long before we can get the Artemis program back on track. Although you and I have said since we started this podcast that the idea of that program being on the moon with people by 2024 has always seemed a bit dubious to me. But I mean, there's one other point I'd like to bring up here, and that's when the Saturn rocket was being developed, every single rocket scientist in the US was working on that project.
Yeah,
you now have however many different companies all pulling from the same set of people, and some will pay more than the government. And that's not to say that the people working for NASA aren't as good. By any stretch, but there aren't as many people working on that as there should be. So these things just take longer by the sheer maths of we've got X amount of rocket scientists
exactly
divided by more companies. So it's a different world now to what it used to be, and it shouldn't be compared.
Yeah, they didn't have, back then they didn't have a bunch of different vendors like we do now. I mean, they had different programs and they had, satellite programs and other, stuff. But like you said, there's a lot more players now than there were back in the 60s. So, and plus there's less people, because of the pandemic. And even before the pandemic happened, a lot of government programs are there's not a lot of people working in them, just because the government doesn't have enough money to pay 500,000 people to work on a single thing anymore.
For sure. And speaking of other companies working in the US and stealing those NASA rocket scientists, we did get some good news on Sunday the 17th, the very next day, when Virgin Orbit achieved their first orbital flight and delivered a payload of 10 CubeSats to low Earth orbit. The rocket is carried into the sky by a modified Boeing 747 plane called Cosmic Girl, and it's released from under the wing over the Pacific Ocean, where it then ignites and pulls away. This was the second powered test flight of the Launcher 1 rocket, and it was returned to flight launch after a failed attempt last May. Virgin Orbit is the sister company of Virgin Galactic, which uses the same air launch technology for its suborbital spaceplane, which is called Spaceship Two. Now, Virgin Orbit claimed that this launch strategy increases the flexibility and responsiveness compared to vertical ground launches. But obviously, I don't have that data, but we'll have to take their word for it.
Yeah, there is. I do think there's some film of this. You could probably go to Virgin Orbit on Twitter and find it. I've seen some of it, and it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, it's a whole lot of fun. As always, I will put links to videos of all the launches we've mentioned within our show notes for you to go and have a look at.
All right. And finally, something else that's new. At some point this week, a startup company called Blue Shift Aerospace will launch its first Stardust suborbital rocket prototype from Loring Air Force Base in Limestone, which is in the north of Maine. It was supposed to go last Friday, but was scrubbed due to the weather. It can carry 3 small payloads to 4,000 feet and then parachute back to Earth. It's a 20-foot tall rocket, or 6 meters for our metric friends out there. And the flight will take about 1 minute and 30 seconds. But what makes this company interesting is their use of biofuel and attempts to be carbon neutral. The fuel can apparently be sourced cheaply from across America. So they'll be live streaming this from their website, which we will post a link to in our show notes.
I find this one really interesting. And when we're trying to address climate change, and it's one of the big questions which is always put towards the space industry, I think this is a fantastic opportunity and avenue to explore. This fuel is farmed in America, locally sourced, and it should be carbon neutral. And maybe this is the answer to the question of, can the space industry operate in a carbon neutral environment? And it's a startup company, so let's keep our fingers crossed that they can get this going. I'm excited by this.
Very cool.
And again, they're taking away more scientists from NASA, so maybe we're never going to get to the moon on Artemis.
I sure hope so, but yeah. They're taking all our scientists away, but good luck to them, though.
Absolutely. I hope it goes well.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful. So I have to take it up the hangar, Joe. We're going to dust it off first.
As discussed at the top of the show, we were saddened to hear of the passing of former NASA astronaut William Thornton. He died at his home in Bourne, Texas at the age of 91. Thornton was selected as an astronaut in 1967 as part of the second group of scientist astronauts. Although due to the program cuts, they were told that it was unlikely that they would fly, so they were dubbed the XS-11. Some of them did hang on long enough to get a flight though, and Thornton ended up with 313 hours in space after 2 missions, STS-8 and STS-51B, both on board the Space Shuttle Challenger.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about Dr. William Thornton. I've met him one time. He was actually at the Skylab 40th anniversary gala in 2013. He was there because he was part of the SMEAT crew. SMEAT stands for Skylab Medical Experiments Altitude Test. And it was basically like a 56-day-long analog mission that was very Skylab-esque. They had experiments. They were living in a mock-up of Skylab. They were doing the same things that, the astronauts would do on Skylab. And this happened in 1972. So he was on the panel for that. I think all the guys from SMEAT were from there, because the 3 guys were Dr. Thornton, Bob Crippen, and Bo Bobko. I remember, though, he was talking, and he was really freaking funny. Like, he was, I guess he had an issue with the bicycle ergometer. I think I'm saying that right. Basically, if you know anything about Skylab, they had an exercise bike. It had 2 functions. First, for exercise, and second, it was a medical experiment. And I think Thornton got so obsessed with the bicycle, he caught it on fire at one point. I'm not making this up. I know that's metal. That's very heavy metal. I was like, I've never done that, so I'm kind of jealous. So he was really a big part of Skylab and putting together a lot of its. I believe he put together some of the observations and experiments for the mission on the medical side, and he helped to refine, some of the, I think the weighing machine, because they did have like a scale. Does not look like an Earth scale, but they had a way to weigh yourself on Skylab without using, obviously a scale, because you don't have weight in space, you have mass. So yeah, he came up with a lot of stuff. He also came up with something called Thornton's Revenge, which was used on Skylab 4, and it's like a makeshift treadmill, and he actually was responsible for inventing the space shuttle treadmill. Now, I was reading some of Thornton's biography, and his career before he joined NASA was insane. Like, this guy, it really speaks to how the 1967 group of astronauts, I've written quite a bit about them. I want to say this really carefully. They were kind of the most well-rounded group of people that had been selected to be astronauts to that point. I mean, they had people with a lot of different diverse experiences for that time. You had somebody like Story Musgrave, who has a degree in just about everything you can imagine. You had Phil Chapman, who'd been to Antarctica, which was not something people just did at that time. So they really had a pretty amazing group. Let's talk about Dr. Thornton a little bit. He joined the Air Force after graduating from the University of North Carolina in 1952. By the way, I'm taking some of this, I believe this is from the University of Texas website. This website has a lot of his papers and his archives. If you're a space nut, I highly suggest you go to this website and search for stuff. It's incredible.
Yeah, I've been enjoying that, going through some of that today in the course of researching this. You sent me that link. There's some great stuff on there.
There's stuff in there that honestly I've been trying to find for like ages, and I was like, oh my god, I tracked it down. More on that another time, but I was searching through it last night doing research for this podcast, and I was searching through it, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe I stumbled across this. Like, I've heard about this, but I didn't know it still existed. Like, I figured it'd been thrown out, or somebody had just, put it in a box somewhere, and no, here it is, right in front of me. So, highly recommend you go look through it. Back to his career. I got a little off track. He joined the Air Force in the 1950s after he graduated from the University of North Carolina. His biography states that he served as officer in charge of the Air Force instrumentation, why can't I say that, laboratory at Eglin Air Force Base, I think that's how it's said, in Florida, at the Flight Test Air Proving Ground. He discovered, this is before he became an astronaut, he discovered that rockets could be tracked by radar. So he invented the radar optic firing error indicator, or the Thornton score, which was which is described as the first practical means of evaluating and maintaining the accuracy of interceptor aircraft. This was highly successful, and he was awarded the Legion of Merit for this in 1956. So this guy was inventing stuff all the way back in the 50s when he was still in his 20s. Anyway, in 1959, he enrolled in medical school. After he did all that, he's like, I just want to be a doctor. So, right? That's as you do. He enrolled in medical school in 1959 at the University of North Carolina. He returned to active duty in 1963, and he was part of the Air Force Aerospace Medical Division at Brooks Air Force Base, which is in San Antonio, Texas. At the time, he was, and this is very appropriate given what I just told you about Skylab, at the time he was assigned to discover, how do we weigh things and people in space. So he invented the linear mass scale pendulum, or mass scale, which, according to the website, did not weigh objects in the conventional sense. What the mass scale measured was the quantity of mass of an object. So once the mass was figured out, a translation of the findings into ounces and pounds or grams and kilograms could be made through the use of a conversion table. Yes, so before he becomes an astronaut, he figures out how to weigh people in space and things in space. And then in 1967, he becomes an astronaut. So he did all that stuff before even becoming an astronaut. So it's freaking crazy. But like I said, it really speaks to how incredible that class was. I really think that class was like the first to, even though some of the guys did not end up flying in space, a few of them did resign, which I can understand. They didn't want to wait 15 years to fly on the space shuttle. I think that it really speaks to, the incredible people that class had, and also how that class really was, I think, one of the first modern astronaut classes where, okay, they weren't just fighter jocks, which that's not bad. I'm not trying to cast judgment against, fighter jocks at all, but they were, they had a lot of skill in many different areas. They could fly planes, and they could figure out how to weigh people in space, stuff like that. So I think it was the first time where we saw, where astronauts had to develop a huge skill set to be able to, perform their job, in space. And I think we're still seeing that today. If you look at a lot of the astronaut, like the Artemis astronauts, if you look at their biographies, their resumes are insane. I mean, yeah, they're nuts. So I feel like Dr. Thornton was kind of the first in a series of starting that, like, okay, this is somebody who is multi-talented, and you need that kind of mind to function in this kind of career. Yeah,
I mean, obviously I haven't done as much research as you on all this, but that group were high achievers, and they continue to be high achievers, the ones that stayed and the ones that didn't stay in their respective careers, which is quite something. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about unsung heroes within spaceflight, and I feel like this group do fit into that category. I think a fair amount of people may have heard the name Story Musgraves, maybe not everyone, but everyone within this group has got one of those backgrounds which you need to, the more you look up, you're like, why don't I know more about this person? This person is amazing, achieved so much in their life, and some of them also were very successful astronauts as well. And they should be inspirational to us the same way that we talked about the new Artemis astronauts are as well.
Yeah.
So we obviously were very sad when we found out about the passing of Dr. William Thornton, but personally, I have very much enjoyed getting to know him over the last few days and finding out more about him. So I hope, like me, you go and delve into some of these files and these biographies of him and get inspired yourself. He did reach the ripe old age of 91. So well played.
Yeah.
And thank you for everything you did.
Yes, thank you. He was really, I do have to say, I only briefly met him, because I was, at the time, I was like, I don't want to talk to any of these guys. But he was really funny, and he was very kind, and he certainly will be missed. From what I understand, I have friends who are authors who got to work with him, and he was awesome. So, truly an unsung hero, and somebody we probably should know more about.
Endeavour Houston, we see a nominal MECO, OMS 1 not required. Welcome to space.
So last week's podcast about alternative space history certainly got everyone talking, and we don't do this enough, so here is some of the correspondence we've had from you this week.
On Instagram, Door in the Dark said, while reading Comcheck and Bringing Columbia Home, I also read Launch on Need, a fictional account dramatizing the prep and launch of Atlantis on a rescue mission to save Columbia's crew based on the in-flight options assessment from the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. Spending a little time in this alternate reality has taken a little of the sting out of reading the real-life histories, as well as bringing the imagined rescue plan to life. I've never heard of that. I'm embarrassed to say I've never heard of that. I need to read it. That might help me out, too, because I love Bringing Columbia Home. That's a wonderful book. Not an easy read. It's very emotional. I'd have to take breaks while reading it, because you're just like, I got to put this down for a minute. It's just a lot. So to hear that somebody kind of did, the other side, like, okay, we're going to rescue the crew, it does give you kind of a sense of hope. So I have to read that. That sounds actually quite nice.
When I saw that comment, I thought that it was something that you would like to see and like to read. So thanks for getting in contact, Door in the Dark. Over on Facebook, Todd Oliver does what he does best. And thanks every week for your memes, Todd. We always appreciate them. But we also heard from Ronald Purviance. I hope I'm saying your surname right. That's how I say it in my head every time I see it. Anyway,
I think it's right.
Ronald is one of our Patreon subscribers, so thank you very much, Ronald. He said that he, as Emily knows, he said that he really enjoys the alt space world so much that he's actually written his own sequel to Voyage by Stephen Baxter. He has shared the link with us, and I will put that in the show notes. He stresses that you shouldn't read it unless you've read the original, but I'm sure some of you might be interested in that.
Now I have to read Voyage, and so I can read the sequel. So definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ronald. Also on Facebook, Dwayne Day, hi Dwayne, pointed out that alternate histories, and I quote, can be used to challenge assumptions about cause and effect relationships. In other words, we can assume that Y happened because of X, and if we can change X, does Y still happen, or does something else happen? It can indicate if our assumptions are strong or weak. That's an interesting point, and it's a good point. On our show, we definitely decided to talk about them more as a form of escapism, which might be needed a lot right now for, unfortunately, a lot of us. But I think Dwayne does make a good point, because there have been times where I'll think about certain things like, what if this had happened? And, okay, what would have happened next because of that? Like, it's almost like watching, you think about an avalanche, what happens right before the avalanche? A little snowflake bumps against something. So it's kind of, I think he makes a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. And which reminds me that Mar mentioned that he's gonna, on Twitter, he said something about writing a fic about Neil Armstrong, multiple Neil Armstrongs saving the multiverse. That kind of reminds me of that. But anyway, also over on Twitter, Suzanne French, who is also one of our Patreon subscribers, says, I don't know if this is the kind of alternate history you had in mind for this episode, but the Lady Astronaut series by Mary Rabinette explores what might have changed if a massive meteorite had hit the Earth in 1952. Brilliantly written, and apparently some good audiobooks too. This was echoed by Courtney Green, who is another one of our wonderful Patreons. Have you heard about this one, Emily?
I have not yet. I've heard about it, but I haven't read it yet. But I'm certainly interested now. I got to check it out.
Add it to the list. That long list of books we both have to read. It's never ending. It's never ending. And of course, some people have suggested who they thought might be in Emily's alternative Skylab crew. So I'm going to go through some of these. And Emily, I don't want you to give away, because eventually we all want to read this book or this post that you're going to do with your alternate mission.
I won't give it away.
But Jason Winstanley suggested that Fred Hayes commanded with Jack Lousma and Story Musgrave. That's a great crew. That is a great crew.
That is a good crew.
Amy Bean suggested a Skylab dream team of Pete Conrad, Al Bean, and Jack Lousma. It's another great crew. And David Hitt made a patch with the crew names Lousma, Kerwin, and Carney. I did enjoy that, so thank you, David, for
definitely a great crew. So definitely a good crew. I wouldn't mind hanging out with those dudes for a while. They're both Navy. Well, Lousman's a Marine, but I'll allow it. It's all good. I'll allow it.
Richard Southworth suggested Hayes, Joe Allen, and Joe Engel. Joe Allen and Joe Engel. That's a tongue twister, and I think that would get confusing. But good crew. Urban Spaceman 64 went with Conrad, Garriott, and Bean, and Courtney Green went for 3 Pete Conrads, suggested that Pete Conrad cloning facility should also be included.
That'd be kind of awesome.
That. Yeah, could you imagine?
Yeah, that'd be kind of, you clone him from like some of his, like they find a thing of a vial of blood left on Skylab, and they just keep cloning like Pete Conrad over and over and over again.
Like that movie Moon. Did you ever see that movie? That was weird.
I saw it years ago, and I think I had like the flu. Like I had a fever. So I'm home, and I think I was in college, because I'm just like chilling. I'm like, I feel horrible. Like I was home that day, and I had a fever, and I'm watching that movie, and I'm like, I can't tell if this is because I'm having a fever or if this is actually in the movie. So I'm not sure if I saw the movie correctly, because I don't know. Yeah.
It's an odd one. Sam Rockwell, I believe. It's an odd one. It is an odd one. But I did enjoy it.
Thanks to all who've got in contact with us over the last week. It's really great to hear from you. And we really appreciate your suggestions. And we'll put any of the books mentioned in the show notes.
Yes, we will.
Hi, I'm Max Kaiserman with Lunar Replicas, and you're listening to the Space and Things podcast with Dave Giles and Emily Carney.
So that's all we got time for this week. So much to cover. We hope you've got something out of it. It's probably a little bit longer than the show normally is, but it's all good stuff, I think, this week, and stuff that needed to have a little bit of focus brought on it. So the show notes are certainly full of loads of extra material this week, so do check that out if you're interested.
And talking of extra material, please consider joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/spaceandthings. Over the course of the next few months, we'll have plenty of bonus content going on in there, and by joining, you're really helping us out. We also appreciate all who have donated to us and purchased one of our t-shirts. Thank you so much. We're beginning to run low on some sizes, so if you want one of our founders t-shirts, please get an order in.
Yes, please do. Thank you very much to all of you, and to all of you who just listen along quietly and don't get in contact as well. That's also very much appreciated. And to anyone who has pressed that share button, that's super helpful. So thank you very much. But please remember, in space, no one can hear you stream.
Space and Things has been brought to you by And Things Productions.